Welcome back to the second part of sculpting the profile. This is where things start to get accurate, hopefully. When you're looking at your sculpture and you're making big decisions about the big proportions, you really need to stand back to get a bit of perspective, because otherwise, if you're working up close, then everything is getting distorted. So you need to stand back and look at it from a distance. As a general rule of thumb, the bigger the sculpt, the further back you need to stand to get that perspective to see it properly. But, you know, if you're sculpting something really small, like one of these little heads, you know, you could just do this sat down and sort of look at it at arm's length. When I'm sculpting this size or bigger, I really like to stand back and look at it from a distance, because otherwise you just end up getting distortions from working too close. Now, our model Mark here has a very distinctive profile. I think if you only very vaguely knew Mark and you saw him somehow on the other side of a misty window in profile, you'd instantly know it was him. He's got quite a long, big forehead, and then a strong nose, then quite a long distance between his nose and his mouth, and then his bottom lip cuts back quite dramatically to the front of his chin. So I'm just going to draw out his profile really big on a whiteboard now. A really useful exercise that you can do at home is just practice drawing people's profiles. It's such an important part of nailing a likeness, and the more you get used to doing it, the more you exercise that muscle, and you'll get used to it and you'll get better at it, and you'll ultimately be a better sculptor. So I'm just going to draw out Mark's profile now really big on this whiteboard. So I'm going to start at the top. I can see he's got like this nice rounded forehead there, cutting down, and then it sort of comes in to the top of his nose there, and then he's got a kind of quite a straight nose coming around like that, and then he's got that long distance I spoke about between his nose and his mouth there, so that's coming down like that, and then you got the top lip, and then the bottom lip is sort of behind it like that, and then it cuts in back to the front of his chin there, and then you've got a sort of a rounded chin, and then you've got his neck coming down, and then the top of his head. So I'm imagining his head underneath his hair, because when you first start sculpting, you want to sculpt them just their bald head, and then you'll add the hair later. So just looking at the top of his head there, sort of coming around, something like that, and then that's the back of his skull curving round there, and then kind of coming in to the back of his neck. So that's roughly his profile, I would say. And now I'm just going to have to do it in clay. But the great thing about clay is that it's actually easier than drawing, is that you can check some of those measurements, so you can check how accurate it is, some of those big proportions. Now I'm going to make the profile in clay on Mark's head. So I know where my hairline is here, and I know where my chin roughly is. And now I'm just going to fill out that outline of his actual face in clay. So it's just like drawing, but with blobs of clay. So I'm going to stand back a bit, and then I'm just going to focus on my photo and start sculpting. So first of all, make his brow come out a little bit more there. And then I think his nose is probably somewhere about there. So I'm just blobbing it on along that profile line that I drew on before. And it's all just like sketching really, but with blobs of clay. So the underneath of his nose there is much further forwards in space than his chin. So I can see I need to add some onto that bit there. And that is usually the case with people, that this area here is much further forward than their chin. That's just back there a bit. And then sometimes I don't even put in their lips to start off with. I just do the general shape of that curve of their mouth bit there, coming back to his chin, just probably a bit like that. It's got that long distance that we spoke about between his nose and his mouth there, so something like that to start off with. And then his chin, his neck's going to come down kind of like that. So as you can see, at the moment I'm standing close up and I'm just looking at that profile. But now to get a bit of perspective, I'm going to stand back, just have a little bit of a look from back here. And just from back here, I can totally see straight away that I need to add a bit more onto the front of his chin there. So just going to do that. Sometimes it can help if you sort of squint your eyes down and just focus on that outline of the profile. I feel like he needs a little bit more on the top of his head. So I'm going to come in and just do that as well. People with distinctive profiles are so instantly recognisable. I was just thinking about waxworks I've sculpted and people with distinctive profiles, especially people with big foreheads. I wonder if you can guess who this person is just from their silhouette. It's Tom Hanks. His mouth is probably about there. You can always just draw things on just to remind yourself where you think things might go. You know, it's funny thinking about famous profiles. I think one of the most famous profiles in recent times in this country has to be the late Queen Elizabeth, because her profile was everywhere on our stamps and our coins and our banknotes. And a few years ago, I was sculpting her. I shared this picture online in the very early stages with just the profile. She didn't even have any eyes, but I just thought it was such a famous profile, people might recognise her. The general consensus from my followers seemed to be that it was going to be Han Solo, Harrison Ford from Star Wars. So I never noticed the resemblance, but there you go. I feel like I'm quite happy with my profile now, but I'm just going to take a couple of measurements just to check that I'm in the right ballpark. So I'm going to first measure chin to the top of the nose there. Yeah, that's measuring okay. And then I'm also just going to check the depth of the head from the brow to the occipital. So just going to take that measurement. Yeah, that's working well. Great. So, you know, profile doesn't have to be totally perfect at this stage. You know, it's an ever-evolving thing, a portrait. But once you feel like it's more or less working, it's best to move on to the next bit. So I'm just going to move that to the front and check that it stayed in the centre, because when you're working from the side it's very easy for things to go a bit wobbly. So I'm going to redraw on my centre line and just make sure it's nice and strong both sides of that bit that I've built out. So just going to draw that on. It's always good to just try and keep both sides moving at the same sort of pace and try and keep it nice and symmetrical. So let's just strengthen that up a bit. And because I did it from this side's a bit more sketchy, so I'm just going to make sure it's all nice and strong. It's very easy to end up with a kind of really thin pancake going down the profile, and that can wobble about and be a bit annoying, so it's good to just strengthen it all up. So I did check some measurements there. The thing that I would recommend is trying to do it by eye and then checking the measurements, because all the time that you're trying to work by eye, then you're stretching yourself and actually training yourself to see better. If you always take the measurements first, then you're never really stretching yourself to learn and improve. So that's how I like to use measurements. Oh, that must be Fernando on my question line. Hello, Amelia speaking. Oh, hello, Fernando, yes. Oh, you got a question for me? Oh, okay. Yep. Great question. Thank you very much. Well, I was right. It is a question. And I've been asked, how much clay does it use to sculpt a head this size? Well, as we've already established, this is a 75% or 3/4 life-size head. So I've been using this bag of clay. So my clay comes in 12.5 kilogram bags, and I've got a bit left, as you can see. So I would say it's taken about 10.5 kilos to sculpt this head. So obviously you have to take into account whatever clay you're using, how heavy the bags are, but I would say around that kind of amount. So I hope that's been a useful answer for your question, and if anybody else has any questions for me, please do put them in the comments and Fernando will phone them through to me and I will do my best to answer them for you. Now I'm happy with my profile and I've checked a couple of measurements and I feel like it's all adding up okay. I'm going to move on to the next stage, and in the next lesson I will be locating these wiggly things on the front of your ears. Why, I hear you ask? Well, everything will become clear in the next episode. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Head over to sculptingmasterclass.com if you'd like to find any of our existing courses or to purchase the reference pack of Mark here so that you can join me for this sculpt along. And don't forget, if you have any questions for me, please just put them in the comments section below and I will get Fernando to phone one through to me at the end of each episode.